is Nicole Whitney, News for the Soul, life-changing talk radio from the uplifting to the unexplained.
You are listening to the News for the Soul radio network. News for your soul. Life-changing broadcasts to souls around the world since January 1997.
Hear all of our previously aired broadcasts of News for the Soul online at newsforthesoul.com. Now let's get back to the show. Next up, it's time for Light Body Healing with Dr. Lara. Let's bring her on to reintroduce herself, her show, and what's up for today. Welcome back, Dr. Lara.
Hey, Nicole. Thanks for having me back. I love doing the show every first and third Thursday of the month, and I'm so excited for today. I am Dr. Lara, functional medicine specialist and intuitive healer, and I merge those two together to help my clients get deep and multidimensional healing from their chronic disease and stress in their life and anything else they're looking to heal and upgrade.
Oops, did we lose you, Dr. Lara?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay. Yep, the floor is yours.
Awesome. So today I have with me my guest is Dr. Harmon Toomer, a family medicine and community health physician and founder and CEO of Health, Wellness, and Weight Loss Centers. She created what became her one-on-one Whole You Total Weight Loss program 20 years ago when she was herself obese and insulin-dependent diabetic and diagnosed with congestive heart failure, but was told she was too high risk when seeking help to lose weight and control her diabetes. Using the program that she developed, she lost 60 pounds in 6 months, got off the insulin, survived her CHF, when told she had only a 50% chance of living 5 years. She has now converted her program to a new online group coaching course, again called Total Wellness and Weight Loss. And welcome, Dr. Toomer.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you today. So I first want to give you the floor to hear your story firsthand about your own journey and also to, about being a physician throughout this dynamic. I'm sure was really challenging.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I went to a medical school, Michigan State University, that really emphasized the biopsychosocial approach to healthcare and to patient care. So it's the whole person. And so, and I've always used that approach. And so when it came to my own diagnosis, I just used the same. Part of what was the problem is that it wasn't widely used at that point. This was 20 years ago. Even though I had, learned it in med school and also in residency. And so I had used it to help people reverse chronic disease. I had, helped my father reverse his diabetes, others reverse, their issues, but I hadn't applied it to myself at that point. And because of the stress of my job, because of the stress of a growing family, I just started, succumbing to a lot of that and gaining weight, and my diabetes, which runs in my family, became an issue. And then 1 month after my daughter was born, I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. It's called peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is not very common. However, I knew what it was because when I lost my first patient in residency, it was a 17-year-old with the same diagnosis. And so to say I was scared and overwhelmed was an understatement. But also being on the other side of what I realized was truly a medical divide. I Even though I was a medical professional myself and I understood the information, I still found that people were talking to my husband instead of to me about their findings, or they would not speak to me as if I understood what they were talking about. And so they would use, layman's terms for medical issues when I, knew clearly what they were talking about. And but the most significant thing that happened, being a physician with a significant diagnosis, is that everyone around me was trying to minimize what was happening. They didn't want me to have the diagnosis that I had because they knew the high mortality rate, and it was difficult for them to accept, and therefore they kept trying to come up with other reasons why I was having the symptoms I was having.
That's so
even though I knew better.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why a doctor should never treat their family.
Yeah. Because, we just get, naturally, we're too close, but I find that to be true as well, that, and I find in my Western medicine practice as a clinical pharmacist that you can be honest and real with your patients without necessarily scaring them. You can convey the gravity of a situation, but also I think in an empowering way to really hopefully help them not feel so confused, lost, helpless, all of the things that we all feel whenever we get a diagnosis.
Yeah, and that empowerment is very important because it does change what happens after that diagnosis. The more empowered a person feels and the more in control they feel, the better their outcome, the easier it is to treat, and they generally have fewer complications.
Yes. So can you give us a little bit more detail and description about what the biopsychosocial approach entails, and also the way that you sort of bring that forward in your practice?
All right. Well, biopsychosocial is, if you break down the word, it's the biology, the psychology, and the sociology of a diagnosis or the person. We are, multifaceted, and so when addressing the biology, of course, those are the symptoms. That's how the body works, how the body functions, or it's, malfunctioning for whatever reason. And so you address the symptoms and the cause of those symptoms. You also address psychology. Either it's because it contributes to the symptoms or it's a reaction to the symptoms or reaction to the diagnosis, and that has to be addressed. It's not enough just to fix the biology. You have to make sure that the person's fine psychologically from that diagnosis. And then the sociology. You have to take into consideration how it affects their family, how it affects their jobs, how it affects their day-to-day life. And unless those things are addressed and taken into consideration, it's easy to overprescribe. It's easy to not help a person, or at least because if there is something that involves family involvement, it's really important that they know what's going on, so you bring them in. And so using that approach to everything really helps in making sure that a person their whole person is addressed and they're taken care of completely.
Absolutely. And I think diabetes is a great example of where this can be so powerful because, you live in South Carolina. I grew up in East Tennessee. A lot of that wonderful Southern food it tastes great, but it's not good for us. And that social aspect, it's one thing to just tell a patient, well, you need to get your blood sugar under control, exercise more, eat less, blah, blah, blah. But that's not going to be successful when you have this cultural ingrainment of, like I said, these foods that we enjoy in the South, but we know aren't good for us.
Exactly. And also just recognizing that even that process of eating less, exercising more, if there's also a genetic component to how successful that's going to be. And so one of the things I've done is I kind of created what I call a like a memo. I was like, just get the memo. Basically, it's a minimal effort for maximum outcome, because what that does, it helps people ease into what it is they need to do. If you throw too much at them at once, they get overwhelmed and they do nothing. And so what I generally do is I look at their social, I do look at, especially with weight loss. Now, I do weight loss because weight is often the symptom of other things that are going on. Most people don't know what those other things are, but they notice their weight. So they'll come to me for weight loss, but I'm looking for a cause. And so usually that's where my biopsychosocial training comes in. I start looking for reasons that, it's physiology. So I look for like prediabetes, insulin resistance, hypothyroidism, and that sort of thing. And then I look at psychological reasons. What is their relationship to food, and why is food reacting the way it is in their body? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Are they stress eaters? And then look at the sociology. Who does the cooking? Who does the grocery shopping? How do they celebrate? Do people celebrate around food? And so it's really important then to, especially in the South, to help people figure out a way where they can still celebrate, they can still do all these things without having to give up everything. Because, it's not helpful if people express their love with food and you tell them, I can't eat it, or I won't eat it. In the long run, the stress that creates could harm them far more than taking a spoonful of that rich macaroni and cheese.
Yes. So let's go in the stress direction, because like you alluded to before, that that presents itself both in our biology and our psychology. And so how do you address that with your patients? I know you're an NLP practitioner as well. So is that where the NLP comes in, or let's dive into that.
Well, I'm also a hypnotherapist, and generally I got certified in NLP and hypnotherapy because another physician who I had been working with essentially told me I was already doing it and I might as well get certified in it so that I could, it's recognized for what I'm doing. And so what I do actually, it's a lot of, I also have a very strong psychology background, so I do a lot of counseling. And so essentially what NLP is, for those who are listening and don't know, it's a neuro-linguistic programming, and essentially what it is, it helps people reframe or remap their mind so that it's easy to get people who look at something one way and then sort of shift the way they think about it so that they get the results they want. So it lessens their stress. And it's a problem-solving mechanism, essentially. And so what I do with stress is I look for the cause first, find out what it is that's causing the stress, and then address it. So if it is something that's physiologic, I'll address that. If it's something that's social, we'll talk through it and figure out what it is. Is it with the person they're interacting with? Is it the person themselves? Is it because they're not getting enough sleep? Or, they have, like in my case, I had a newborn and I couldn't take care of my newborn because I had been given I couldn't breathe, essentially. I had no energy and no reserve and no capacity to take care of my own child. And so when things like that happen, you can either fix the problem or help people deal with the problem more efficiently and cope with it a little bit better. And so that's essentially how, stress, how I address stress.
Oh, I love that. So let's use the example of, since you're a weight loss expert, let's really focus on that and sort of, we already talked about this a little bit, but people's habits and their relationship with food. How do you help people shift that? Or maybe even I'm sure it starts with bringing awareness to what that relationship is, especially when we're at the beginning of the journey. Maybe we've just been diagnosed with insulin resistance. We already know that we need to probably drop a few pounds. So what does that look like in terms of creating the container to really have a successful journey?
Okay. Well, that is really the cornerstone a lot of what I do, mostly because when I was diagnosed, I was simply too tired, overwhelmed to do anything strenuous, to do anything too complicated. It had to be easy. It had to be somewhat mindless. Otherwise, I couldn't handle anything more. And I started noticing that when I tweaked my habits, I didn't necessarily change them. I just would tweak them a little bit, or I would add something to them in small increments. And that seemed to have a big impact. And then over time, they became second nature. And so for an example, I have, people who always say, I want to drink more water. And dehydration causes a lot of problems. Fatigue is really often related to dehydration more than anything else. Sleep is affected by dehydration. Food digestion and what nutrients you get out of food and what triggers your brain to tell you if you're full or not, or if you need to eat more, is also related to dehydration. And so what I do is tell people, for example, if you do something all the time, eat. We always eat. That's just something that's a given that we're going to do. And so tie your water intake to your eating. So before putting anything else in your mouth, drink water. There's no hard or fast rule at the beginning of how much you should drink. If you're not drinking hardly anything, any amount is going to be better. And so just having people just drink water or drink a fluid. If they won't drink water, figure out ways so that they can get that fluid in, and they have some incentive either by, infusing it with lemon or by using a sugar-free sweetener, just something that gets them to the point where they can eventually the full amount of fluid they need in a day. And so that's how I just do that with every single thing. So a lot of times when people are insulin resistant or diabetics, they crave carbohydrates, which of course then makes their blood sugar worse, which then makes them crave carbohydrates even more. It's one of those paradoxical systems in our body that kind of, the symptoms make the disease worse, and the disease create the symptoms. And so what I do, instead of telling people don't eat sweets or don't eat carbs, because their body's fighting against that. What I do is like, if you eat a carbohydrate, do this with it. Eat a protein, eat some healthy fat. Never eat a carbohydrate by itself. Try to eat only one carbohydrate at a time. If you do eat something sweet, make sure it's after a no-carb meal. Those type of things. And what ends up happening is it breaks that craving cycle. And so eventually what happens is people are just like, oh, they stop craving carbs, they stop craving sweets, they stop, and then their insulin resistance, their diabetes starts reversing, their weight starts to drop because of it. And so it adds more incentive. So there's a visual incentive, there's a feel-good incentive, because also when blood sugars are normalized, fatigue goes away. You feel more in control of eating. And so that's empowering. And so it just is there's a psychological, physiologic, and social aspect, because what that does also is if people share food as a way of showing love, they'll have a plan of exactly how they could have that food without it creating a problem for them.
Absolutely. And I love that, when you talk about, using food to express love, which, so many cultures do. And it's so natural for us that I think that's one of the things that I feel, both you and I are called to do with our clients and our patients, is to bring the information that we know about food and nutrition to the forefront to really help people make better choices. So instead of, using maybe that corn oil or seed oil or whatever it is that we would normally make something yummy with, changing that to a coconut oil or an avocado oil or something, that our body, that really helps dampen down that inflammation. And so like you said, like helping, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's just, and a lot of times it's just people don't know. So once you tell them, they're fine. It's an easy transition for them.
Yeah, and I feel like it brings such a relief too, like you said earlier. So you don't have to tell people no or to totally give something up. It's just a matter of how to make it healthier, and then also too maybe just a little less in quantity, because once our brain's satiation switches get recalibrated, then our body will naturally tell us also, excuse me, okay, this is when you've had enough. Because, and this probably better than anyone, is when our blood sugar is not well regulated in our body, those, and by satiation, I mean that feeling of feeling full and satisfied, that switch gets a little skewed, and that also feeds into that cycle that we could find ourselves in of the cravings and then or the overeating, and not realizing that we're overeating till it's too late.
Well, and our bodies are designed. I mean, when you think about how our bodies are designed, we are animals. We are part of a food chain, and so we are designed for two things. I mean, we're designed essentially to make sure that we survive so we can, reproduce. And so there's a couple of things that our brain is hardwired for. One is our fight or flight reaction to protect us from being eaten by another animal. And then the other is to prevent starvation. And so, the way to prevent starvation is to drive our appetite. Our appetite's driven by the one substance that's broken down in our mouth. Everything else doesn't get digested. It gets broken into smaller pieces, but doesn't get digested until it gets into the intestines, except in our mouth. Our saliva starts breaking down carbohydrates to tell the brain, your drug's coming, drive your appetite so that this person will eat more and more and more. And so, which is one of the reasons why I always recommend that the first thing you put in your mouth should never be a carbohydrate. Don't give your brain that message right off the bat. Eat some protein, eat some healthy fat first, then add your carb in. Because what that does is it starts the other mechanism of satiety, as opposed to it starts driving you towards telling your brain you're eating and you're going to be full soon, as opposed to driving your brain saying eat more, eat more, eat more.
Right, and so I think this is also a really super empowering point that I want to make sure everyone out there hears, is that when you have those cravings, that's your survival brain, or that's what some people call like the lizard brain, that unconscious biological survival aspect of our bodies and our brains and how we evolved over all these years, millions of years. And so it's really not, your cravings are not your fault, which I think will allow, because I feel like, especially when we're going through this weight loss struggle, because I think a lot of us do struggle with it until we find the right tools and the right balance, that we blame ourselves and we beat up on ourselves a lot. So are there ways that you help people deal with that too?
I just remind them, I think what it is that weight loss is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Those who make money off of weight loss don't make money off of long-term success. They make money off of repeated need. And so the system's usually set up to create the weight loss people want, but not to maintain it. And so the weight comes back. And so what ends up happening, the messages that's been given out to people is that the programs help you lose weight, but the weight gain is your fault. And so one of the things that I do is I remove that blame And I explain very clearly what the mechanism is and why it's so difficult. And then create a system that's actually pretty easy. Once you, I put it this way, I just kind of, everyone has a stew that that will sustain them for the rest of their lives. And the components may change a little bit. The amounts of each of those components may change a little bit, but the overall stew pretty much stays the same. And each person has their own. Once you figured out what that stew, what the components and the amounts that go into that stew are, it becomes very easy for that person then to, create the results they want and then maintain them forever because it's theirs. Mm-hmm. And so, for someone who is insulin resistant, you focus a little bit more on carbohydrates. For someone who is an overeater but is not insulin resistant, you focus on something else. And, so there's all these different things and components. And again, that's why the biopsychosocial system is important because, depending on why someone, what triggers someone's appetite, what triggers someone, feeling a certain way, really changes what it is that needs to happen with that individual. And which is why programs that are individualized, that allow people to learn what it is they need to pay attention to, are helpful because, cookie cutters just don't work. There's some things in medicine that you can do the same thing for every single person because it's the standard. Every person will respond differently, but it's still the standard. When it comes to health and wellness and weight loss, there is no standard. There are certain things that the body does, and that's just the way the body works, and there's nothing we can do to change that. But what each individual has to do to control those processes may be different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that's why I love this service that you're providing to the world because it is so needed to help people understand their own bodies but also how their lifestyle is really affecting their biology. So like you mentioned earlier, if they're not getting enough sleep, if their job is, super stressful, or maybe even if their job is not that stressful, but they're not happy there, things like that can really affect how we eat, how we approach food. And even just that baseline stress can increase the inflammation in our body in such a way that it can, in and of itself, elevate our insulin levels. Do you agree with that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Our moods affect what happens to food in our body. And so one of the things I always tell people, if you're going to eat something because you want it, sit and pay attention to what you're doing and enjoy it. Let all your senses get involved and let your sense of smell, taste, vision, really focus. Otherwise, it's wasted. I mean, if you're going to eat a piece of chocolate cake, instead of sitting there feeling guilty about it, sit and enjoy it if you're going to do it anyway. Because what happens when you enjoy it, your dopamine levels in your brain go up rather than your cortisol levels from your adrenal glands go up. And so if you're enjoying it, and yes, there are calories involved. Yes, there are things that, can cause weight gain. However, it's not as efficient when you're enjoying it. When you're stressed, your body gets really efficient at taking what you eat and turning it into fat. And so our moods affect what happens to food in our body. And so I always stress that. And then the other is simply that how we approach food is really how we approach life is kind of how we approach food. If we're constantly stressed and we're constantly rushing and we're constantly doing, the same thing happens when we eat. And when those things happen, none of our systems are as efficient. And so you can't hear your body. You can't hear what the change is. You can't feel the things that are happening. You're not in tune because you're too distracted. And so, I say all that just to say that, don't underestimate the importance of the wellness component when trying to become healthy, especially when it comes to weight loss. The wellness and the weight loss are tied together. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and I really find that this journey to wellness and weight loss, if that's part of your journey to wellness, is really a choice of self-love. And for this year of 2022, I've chosen the word of choice and the theme of choice and choosing to really come in and be prevalent, because I really feel like it is such an empowering concept to realize that we are making choices for ourselves every minute of every day. Even if we're choosing to be unconscious, that's still a choice. And so, like you said, if you're constantly rushed around, or even, listen, I'll say where I'm guilty here is that when I'm at work at the hospital, I am usually eating on the run. I do not allow myself that break time to sit and be conscious and aware with my food. But I can totally see, feel, and know the difference when I'm not at work, and I'm really, I allow myself that space to tune in to my food, be grateful for it, really, taste all the different flavors and textures and temperatures and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I would definitely encourage people, if one thing that you could do right away is just make the choice to be present while you're eating and not be distracted.
Yes. And that's one of the things, I mean, when I get a very detailed food diary from my clients, and they're always very surprised because I ask, what are you feeling? What did you eat? How much of it? What were you feeling? And what were you doing at the time? Because it gives me a lot of information when people eat while they're sitting in front of the television, and that they tie TV watching to their food, turn off the television, and all of a sudden their food consumption changes. And so, I mean, I even, with the pandemic, this is a perfect example. All of us have been under some tremendous amount of stress that's been unique, that none of us have ever experienced before. And in my case, my father passed away on a Friday. The country shut down on a Tuesday, and my office shut down on the following Friday. And nothing changed. I ate the same things I ate. I had the exact same activity, yet my weight kept creeping up. And I knew it was because of stress. It was because it was an emotional reaction to all the things that were happening. And so rather than focusing on my eating by cutting back on eating or changing, because I didn't need to, I simply focused on my coping mechanisms. And as I focused on my coping mechanisms, that weight began to fall away again. And so, and in fact, I got so good at it, I actually overshot a little bit. So, but what that's done is that as I go into new situations and new endeavors, like now, starting a new program, and, rather than that stress causing me issues, I just use those same mechanisms to remain calm, to remain focused in a way so that, all the rest of my body mechanisms don't get affected.
Yes. That's so true because, like you said earlier, usually the weight loss is just a symptom of something deeper. And, whether that we maybe don't feel safe or, maybe we are using food to dampen our emotions in a different way. There's so many different things. And that is so true about, I've experienced that too with stress, eating what in theory should be healthy, and then also still exercising, but somehow the weight keeps creeping on. And so, I think we could all say how frustrating that is, and how at the same time for me, how refreshing it is to know that just by focusing on the stress, that can be so powerful and impactful. Yeah. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us.
And one of the things you mentioned, your word for this year is choice. And mine is courage. And the reason I focus a lot on courage is simply because to help people recognize that by making their choices, they are being courageous, I think that we don't pat ourselves on the back enough for the things we do. We take for granted some of the things we do because we're told we're supposed to do certain things. And so therefore we don't congratulate ourselves when we actually do them. And so one of the components of what I do is to just, I always, at the people, always laugh because when my first question is, to my clients is, how are you feeling? And then my second question was, since we spoke last, what was the most difficult thing that happened about weight at all until the end? Because the weight is secondary. It's all the other things that we need to address that make more, that, the weight might tell me if those things affected them or didn't affect them, but it doesn't change the fact that something happened. And so that's generally my focus and always has been my focus.
Yeah, and I think by asking those specific questions too, you really get an idea of where the person is storing those emotions and storing that stress in the body. Because
Exactly.
I'm a true believer that, where things manifest in our body in terms of health challenges really is a reflection of either where we're not dealing with something and we're sort of storing it away so that we don't have to face it, or we've had, like a heartbreak, or, maybe we feel like stabbed in the back and we are having, back pain or neck pain, or, there really is a connection between that energetic / psychosocial and our body, for sure. You are nail on the head with your approach to this, for sure.
And in medicine, sadly, sometimes you hear people say, oh, it's just in their head. Well, absolutely, but that's legitimate. I mean, what happens in our head affects our body. So it doesn't matter that, we can't reproduce the pain because it's something that's being connected from an emotion in the brain. That's still something you have to address and take care of. And so, and it doesn't make it less real. It just simply gives you the reason. And so, and I've always said this with my patients, is that when they come to me, it's like, something's not right. I just feel like something's not right. To me, that is a real symptom. It's something that needs to be investigated. Because people, if for no other reason, just for reassurance that they're okay, so it's like, there is a diagnosis called worried well. And so you want someone to be well, and they may be worried. So if you can ease their worry, that's still treating them.
Yeah, and, I think a lot of us that have gone through different medical education, whether it's, medical school, pharmacy school, different psychology programs, we are sort of taught that the placebo is not such a good thing. But I can tell you one of the things that really changed my whole perspective about the power of the mind and in its role in our health and wellness is when I read Dr. Joe Dispenza's work about you are the placebo and you do have the power. And what a empowering, magnificent thing that we can heal ourselves just with our mind. Now, granted, along the way, we might need some more supportive tools to help us, but really it just comes down to us deciding and making a choice and being courageous to do that.
Yeah. And having the knowledge to know what those choices should be or what their choices are. And, I think that there is a lot of misinformation out there. And it's very difficult for people to wade through all the noise and to know what's real and what isn't. And unfortunately, it used to be where, most of the people in medicine were on the same page. And that's just simply not the case anymore. There's still, we've at least in the United States, we've become something of a celebrity culture. And the way to become a celebrity is to be as outrageous as possible. And unfortunately, medicine has not been spared from that phenomenon. And it makes it difficult for people.
It does, yes. And so I think it's so important for all of us out there to find that practitioner that will help, sort of be on the journey with you, guide you through it. I know I have my own practitioner that I work with, and, it's like every psychologist has a psychologist.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Just because we're in the medical field doesn't mean that we also don't need tools and help and guides and teachers. Mm-hmm. And so, but that does bring me to, since you brought it up, the misinformation, do you have sort of a top 3 or sort of your pet peeves of misinformation that you want to set the record straight on?
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest pet peeves I have is that whatever is wrong, there's something you can take to make it go away. And so, and what that has done is it's led to the underutilization of movement. Sometimes it doesn't have to necessarily be exercise, even, Tai Chi, yoga, which are forms of exercise, but it doesn't have to be strenuous exercise. You don't necessarily have to sweat for you to get the benefit of movement. And so I think that that's one of my biggest pet peeves, which also helps in trying to cut through the minutia, because if you're dealing with someone whose every single suggestion, every single diagnosis is followed by a suggestion that requires a purchase from that same person, more than likely you need to start thinking about the legitimacy of it. Not to say that there aren't people out there who are selling, but if every single time something happens, it's, take this pill that you can buy from me. And so so that, which brings me to my second pet peeve, is the way that many prey on the insecurities of other people, particularly those who are trying to be healthy, who are trying to lose weight, who are very vulnerable, because it's an overwhelming place to be. And so having someone say, don't worry, I can hold your hand and walk you through it, is very easy to grab that hand, not knowing whose hand it is. And so so that's another that I would say that my third is that the rejection of real, legitimate scientific information over information that doesn't make a whole lot of physiologic sense. And no matter how hard I try to explain, that's just simply not how the body works, just not being listened to. And then having to fix the problem when it gets to the point where, it can't be ignored anymore. And so the message there is, it is so much easier to prevent something than it is to reverse it once you've got it. And so if you've been told you're pre-diabetic, stop it now, rather than waiting till you become a diabetic to start treating it. And if your body's giving you a message, then listen and have it checked out by a licensed practitioner.
Yes.
Because there are many, many people out there who are health coaches, who are, coaches of different types, who have no background in medicine.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the things that I like to sort of always put out there, is that we should be interviewing our practitioners, because really they're part of, our team, but you need to make sure that they are really working for you and in your best interest. So, exactly. What background do they have? What education do they have? What credentialing do they have? Are they willing to listen and really hear you, or are they already coming at you with sort of a predetermined plan that really has nothing to do with you as the person that's looking for the help? And so I also love how you caution against the buy aspect. And that's one of the things I tell my patients, because especially in functional medicine, that's sort of, I feel like, there's an opportunity to over-test and overspend money when you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot that I feel like that you can learn and with, walking a patient through changing the diet a little bit at a time, like adding in things instead of totally taking away, doing an elimination phase instead of going straight to, the multi-$100 food test or, all the different things, the genetic testing. There's so many things. And so I give my patients the options. If you want to, if you have the money, you want to spend it, great, I can set you up with the testing. If you're curious and you want to sort of get to know your body along this journey, then I encourage, like all the things that you and I have talked about today, like really tuning in, getting quiet, creating space, making those choices with your food, making little augmentations and noticing how your body, you can feel your body's metabolism changing along the way. And so, yes, absolutely. And then I just one more thing that I will say. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You said one more thing. I was just going to say that with testing, the question you always have to ask yourself, and this is something that, I was trained and taught, 25 years ago, was, is the test going to change what you do? If no matter what the answer you get is going to do, you're still going to do the same thing, there's no point in testing. It's just for,
I totally agree.
It doesn't make sense, to test for things. And, and having an answer doesn't necessarily mean you could do anything about it. Especially if it's genetic testing. I mean, if it's in your genes, it's in your genes. You're still going to have to do the same thing regardless. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And yes, so the only other thing I was going to say is that when you talked about prevention and, a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, it's so expensive to eat healthy. And it's like, well, you're going to pay now or pay later, unfortunately. If your mantra in your head that I can't afford to eat healthy now, then you're most likely going to find yourself in a situation where you're paying for medications, you're paying for doctor's visits, you're paying for procedures, you're paying for ER visits. So, or your family's paying emotionally because you're not unavailable because they've lost you too early.
Yes, and so really
the other though, but that's not even true though. That's really not true.
No, it's not.
You can eat healthy on a budget. It's really easy. I mean, if you think healthy means that you have to eat fresh fruit, you have to eat fresh vegetables, and you have to eat certain things, then it can get expensive. But unless you say, a cabbage is very economical. You can buy a cabbage for $1, a little over $1, and it can feed a whole family if you add, a bag of beans that are less than $1, and then you can, add rice if you want. You don't even have to have meat because if you combine rice with those vegetables, you end up having a complete protein, which is, and there's a reason why so many cultures around the world have rice and beans as their staple, because it is a complete meal.
Yes.
And it's very inexpensive to eat that way.
Yes. Yes. I feel like I'm just, yes. But also, too, they're, eating with the seasons. I think people underestimate how economical that can be, and especially there's places, in California, we're really lucky because of our agricultural industry, and it's really a 4-season industry. There's places in the South that are the same way. So if you can eat with the seasons, so, have those wonderful warming squashes and root vegetables now, and those are really inexpensive foods anyway. And when they're in season, the price goes down because the farmers need to sell them. And then there's also, food box options where if maybe you live in a super cold environment and you're very dependent on a grocery store for your food, or even if you live in a food desert in a very urban environment, there are more and more options because of our technology. Talk about some things to be grateful for is that we can actually have food delivered to our door that is fresh and inexpensive and healthy for us. And so one of the services I really enjoy is called Imperfect Foods, and that is actually grocery surplus that you can get delivered to your door. And I can tell you, my husband and I, we have saved so much money by doing that versus shopping at our local grocery stores up here in and around Tahoe, because the cost of food up here is super expensive. So don't be afraid to just get on Google and start exploring maybe, food delivery options in that way, especially like if you live in a place like I do where the cost of living is pretty high.
It's very high. Or even just making a choice of, you can go to McDonald's as, a family and spend $3 per person on a meal, or even if you just go to the dollar menu and it's $2 or $3, okay. But if you go to the dollar store and take that $15 to a dollar store, better to eat the canned versions of vegetables than eat McDonald's. You can still, and it goes farther. So if you took $15 to the dollar store, because most canned vegetables are like 50 cents at the dollar store. So you can get green beans, you can get corn, you can get peas, you can get all these different foods, get maybe a bag of rice. And of course, rice is one of those carbs that you can limit. But if you have a plate where it's 2/3 vegetables and 1/3, 1/3 rice, that's a healthy plate. Go to the grocery store and find the meat that's on sale. Ground meat's often on sale. Sometimes the meat that they need to get, has to be cooked by the next day is on sale. And, throw that in the oven or ground up the meat, throw some seasoning in it, put it in there. You have a complete meal that's much healthier, that is much less expensive, and goes farther. And those are, but it's just a matter of learning those things and having, those problems, having someone help with that problem-solving process.
Yes. Don't beat up on yourself about where you are. We are all okay exactly where we are. You have to start from somewhere. So start with where you are. Be happy that you are coming to a place where you're curious, you're exploring, you're asking questions, you're open to new possibilities and learning new things and making new choices. And just that optimism of, what good can come out of today and the choices that I will make for myself today. And like you said, when you just change your perspective a little bit, it can be so powerful.
And pat yourself on the back. Look for all the things you've done that are good instead of focusing on the things that you did that are wrong, that you think are wrong. Because a lot of times they aren't even wrong. They're just, you've been conditioned to think they're wrong and they're not. So it's just, just love yourself first, and then, everything else around you will start to reflect that.
Yes. All right. So tell us where all your future clients can find you.
The best place to find me is drtoomer.com. That's drtoomer.com. And I'm also on Facebook, C. Harmon Toomer, MD. But if you put in Catherine Harmon Toomer, MD on Google, I'm the only one there is. So people can find me.
Fantastic. And also tell us about your program.
Well, I have a group program where I go through a lot of what I talked about today, just kind of busting myths, helping people from where they are. So if they, whatever questions they have, I answer them. I also have other licensed professionals and experts in their field coming in to do master classes like sleep, hormonal changes, hypnosis, just meditation. So a lot of stress relief information, including financial advisors. So anything that causes people stress, relationships, whatever, I have someone coming in to try and help, deal with that. And then I also do one-on-one coaching, and I have different tiers of that depending on what people need, depending on what their budget is. and because I try to be as accessible as possible. And so anywhere from like $100, there's a way to get in touch, to help, for me to help, because I just, my first love is community health and family medicine, and that is where my focus lies. And so I try to make sure that I can be available to anyone who needs me.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Toomer, for your time and for your expertise and your insights. And again, you guys can find her at drtoomer.com, drtoomer.com. And my name is Dr. Lara May, and you can find me at drlaramay.com, drlaramay.com. And you can sign up for any of my functional medicine or intuitive healing services there. And thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on. I would love to talk more about the medical divide that you alluded to at the beginning.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yes, awesome. Okay, well, all of you out there, we send you off with love and light, and we wish you the best on your health and healing journey. See you next time.
Bye.
Hear all of our previously aired broadcasts of News for the Soul online at newsforthesoul.com. Now let's get back to the show.